Hi, I'm Matt. I'm one of the hosts of Mud and Blood, a podcast all about dark, gritty, and grim role-playing games, tabletop role-playing games. Every month, we do a review of a new game, and to accompany our audio-only full review that we do on our podcast, we produce these videos, these visual reviews. And the purpose of these reviews is to show the visuals, so the artwork, the layout, that sort of thing, the physical products themselves, of each of the games that we review to accompany the full review. So if you're coming here looking for a full review of the game this month, which is Forbidden Lands, a dark fantasy survival game by Swedish publishers Fria Ligan, you've come to the wrong place. This is a visual review only, as I said. If you want to listen to our full review, it's over 2.5 hours long. Head over to mbcast.co/32. We'll talk about the mechanics, the setting, the visuals, the utility, and the approachability, plus how crunchy it is. So with that out of the way, let's have a quick overview of what's available with the physical products when you want to buy, if you want to buy Forbidden Lands. First of all, you may have noticed that I'm holding up a box here rather than a book. Forbidden Lands comes as a box set with 2 books, a booklet, and a map, and a sticker pack. That's quite a lot of bang for your buck. There's quite a lot in here, and yeah, it comes in this nice sturdy box with some really nice artwork, by the way, this kind of iconic artwork of the game. First up inside the book is the player's handbook. This is, as you can see, a faux leather, like reddish tint cover, hardback cover. It's got an image of the Raven God, one of the gods, human gods of the setting, on the cover, and the Fria Ligan logo on the back. It does have a ribbon, but mine came out after the second time I used it. So if you're buying this book, be gentle with the ribbons because they might come out a little bit easier than normal. Next up is the Game Master's Guide. As you'll have no doubt noticed, it follows a very similar kind of style to the previous book. It also has this faux leather effect, but in a more green color. It's got the god Worm, which is this like one of the second main god of the humans on it, and also has the Fria Ligan logo on the back. This one does have the ribbon still attached, so that also comes with a ribbon. The third book is actually a booklet, 40 pages long, including the covers, called The Legends and Adventurers. The main draw with this book, in my opinion, is that it has a life path character generation system as an alternate to what's presented in the player's handbook. There's some very cool tables in there, and it produces some very cool characters. And last but not least, we have the map. This is a full color map. It looks gorgeous. It's big, and it's a hex grid. We'll talk about that in a second, but the main thing to note is that it's a double-sided map. It has the same map on both sides. The reason for that is because it comes with a sticker pack. These are permanent, not reusable stickers, and the intent with them is that as you're playing the campaign, as you're exploring the map, every campaign will be different. You come across these adventure sites, and you place them down wherever you come to on the map. There are also some gravestone stickers, so if any PCs die, you can put a gravestone on the map, which is quite cool. Yeah, and that way, after you finished a campaign, you will have a visual memento of that campaign in the form of a map with other stickers on it. The intention is you flip it over if you want to play another campaign, and there you're ready to go with a blank map, ready to go for your second campaign. However, it's worth noting that the official campaign book, which we'll come to in a second, it has a bunch of named locations in it, which you need to progress the meta plot. There are only one sticker of each of those named locations, so if you played through the full campaign, use these stickers on the map, the named ones, you wouldn't be able to use them again if you played the campaign a second time with a different group. So it's just something to be aware of. Raven's Purge is the name of the campaign book I've just mentioned. It's in the same format as the player's handbook and the Game Master's Guide, except that it's got a matte cover with a nice piece of artwork on it. It doesn't have a ribbon either, but it otherwise follows the same size and general styling of the other books. I'll mention it briefly, but unfortunately this is a Kickstarter exclusive at the moment, so it's not available for sale. The Spire of Quetzal. It has 4 additional adventure sites written by guest authors, Patrick Stewart, Chris McDowell, Ben Milton, and Carl Sternberg, which are, if you're in the OSR scene, those are some pretty big names. Hopefully it will become available to non-Kickstarter backers at some point in the future, but it follows the same format as Raven's Purge with this matte finished hardback cover and a nice piece of artwork. Last but not least, in terms of what's available to buy physically from Fria Ligan for this game, there's a custom set of dice, which really make running the game a lot easier, so highly recommended. and a deck of cards. And this deck of cards comes with a nice, quite hard lidded box rather than a tuck box, like one of these little card flimsy tuck boxes. And there's a massive deck of cards in there that have things like initiative. Initiative is card based. The combat cards, so there's advanced type of combat that uses cards. Mount cards, I'll just read it off the back. And artifact cards. So those are the main cards you get in here. You don't really need the mount cards, the artifact cards. You can write those down on a character sheet, roll for them randomly in the books, etc. But the combat cards are probably the biggest draw of this. Okay, one last thing to talk about, I'll bring up the player's handbook again, is the format. You might notice that it's not letter-sized, as all of the previous Fria Ligan books are. It's also not digest size, it's a little bigger. It's a nice kind of halfway house between those two formats. The format is actually called G5. It's pretty much unknown outside of Sweden, but yeah, it's been used in Sweden for role-playing games for a long time. And Fria Ligan have chosen to go with this format to tie this game back to its old school roots. That follows through in the styling in terms of it having black and white artwork throughout the book. There's no color artwork inside. They've used a really famous Swedish artist who's done a lot of role-playing book art in the past. It's a hex crawl exploration game, which is also quite old school. So yeah, they've basically pitched this really as an old school game, and the format ties into that. If you want to know the dimensions of G5, I need to look down at my notes very briefly, which I dropped on the floor. It's 169 by 239 millimeters, which is 6.7 by 9.4 inches for people using imperial measurements. One last thing about the covers before I move away. They have typically of high quality role-playing books. They have an oversewn binding. These, the main two books, in fact, all of these hardback books, including Raven's Purge, have a rounded spine, which makes it a little bit more, lets it lay open a little bit nicer than if it was a flat one. Okay, with that out of the way, let's move over to the desk where we can look at the artwork and the layout in more detail. Okay, so let's take a look inside this book. The first thing to talk about are the Endpapers. The Endpapers are black and white maps of the Ravenlands. This is exactly the same map that you find in the color map, except that it's done in a different style by a different artist. This feels much more old school than the color map, although the color map is beautiful. This also is quite stunning. Really, really nice map. Nothing negative to say about it whatsoever. And it's nice that we have a double page spread of it in each of the books. A slight negative is that we have this map on both sets of Endpapers in all three of the main books. This book, the Game Master's Guide, and Raven's Purge all have the same map on both the front and the back Endpapers. It would have been nice if we don't have any double page spread of any of the artists, especially Niels Gulliksen, the main illustrator. It would have been a nice place to have included some illustrations from him. But there we are. Those are the Endpapers. Let's talk very quickly about the illustrators. Niels Gulliksen, as you can see here, is the main illustrator. He's been in the RPG scene since the early 80s. He's out of Sweden, although he has done some work for some English RPGs as well. His work is supplemented by Nicholas Brandt, who's an additional illustrator, and I'll show you some examples of both of their works. First of all, most of the art is by Niels Gulliksen. So you can see here, Niels has done both of these pieces. They're older pieces, both of them from the 80s, and this is also an older piece from 84, so one of his early pieces. And then this piece on the left here, it's the same artist. This is Niels in 1984. This is Niels in 2018. So he's been commissioned to do some additional new artwork for the books, which you can tell that there's a very different style there. In addition, there are some pieces that he's done in the mid to late 80s. I want to go to the Magic chapter where this is noticeable. Here, where he's used a bit more gray shading. So his new stuff that's been commissioned doesn't have any gray shading. It's all black and white inked. His really old stuff also is black and white inked. But his stuff in the kind of the later half of the 80s has a lot of this gray shading in it. It's a slightly different style. And then Nicholas Brandt, on the other hand, who's been brought in to supplement. These are all by Nicholas Brandt here. He's also done the graphics on at the top of the page here. These page borders, the call-out boxes. That's all done by Nicholas as well. Yeah, they look really good. They look very old school, black and white inked. Yeah, nothing else to say about that other than it fits the rest of the style really well. let's talk about layout. This is a good place to actually have the layout. Page borders are on every single page, apart from the chapter, first page of a chapter, in which case we get a slightly bigger page border. And I apologize. Okay, the page borders on the tops are actually by Niels Gulliksen. I can see that here, whereas the ones at the top are by Nicholas Brandt. So it's still a similar. It feels very similar. I actually wasn't even aware that there were two different artists doing the two different illustrations there. They match in tone very, very well. Call-out boxes are done with this kind of parchment effect, predominantly with an icon in the middle. Some of them have a pentagram. Some of them have this kind of hooded figure with two wide eyes. 2 columns spread throughout the book. Tables either follow within, as you can see here, within a column. So you can see that there's a single column width table. All the tables have alternating gray and white rows, or they can go full page width like these ones here, or in the gear section we have some tables that go across an entire 2-page spread. Now this looks great when you're when you've got it open in a physical book, but on a PDF on a tablet this can actually be quite annoying because it's kind of hard to see where all the information lines up. It's only in the gear section that you have these double page spread tables. But anyway, that's the layout and the art. I wanted to quickly mention the GM's guide next. Okay, so with the GM's guide specifically, I really just wanted to talk around 2 things. The first one is the bestiary. Within the bestiary, we have a double page spread for every single monster. You've got a description of like a bit of fluff about the monster, their stats, and their monster attacks, as well as an image for every single one. The exception to this are the demons. The demons are a bit more complex. They get 6 full pages, so 3 full page spreads with lots of tables for creating demons. The other thing to talk about are the 3 named adventure sites in the back of this book. One is called the Hollows. We'll actually focus here. Each of them has a 2-page spread map of that adventure site. They look really good. They're also done by Nicholas Brandt, I believe, and they just look really excellent. So I'm trying to find show you all 3 of these very quickly. Got a marker in there somewhere. Here we go. There's Weatherstone, which is like a castle, ruined castle, and then Vale of the Dead is more like a dungeon in a valley. Okay, and that's the Game Master's Guide. That's the only other bit I really wanted to show, the Game Master's Guide. Okay, so I did mention the gorgeous full color map, and I kind of wanted to show it in a little bit more detail. So here you can see the full color map. It's too big to show with how I've got my desk set up, but hopefully you should see enough detail here to see that it's a really, really great style. It has full numbering and lettering across the top and left edges. It has these nice icons in each of the 4 corners, a different one for each. The legend looks really nice, and generally it's just a really, really lovely map. The hex grid isn't super obvious on it, but you can still see it if you look on the planes, and you can kind of tell when you're looking at the shape of some of the rivers that it's following a hex. But other than that, it is just generally a really, really gorgeous map. And that's kind of all I really wanted to say about it. Okay, and the next and last thing to talk about are the cards and the dice. Let's start with the dice. 1 pack of dice gets you these 12 dice. The attribute dice are on the left. You get 4 white attribute dice, 3 red skill dice, and 2 gear dice, black gear dice. And then you also get these 3 polyhedral dice, a D8, a D10, and a D12. Those are used for artifacts and for consumables. Now, I would generally recommend to buy 2 sets of dice because some of the PCs can start with up to 6 attribute points in their key attribute, in which case 4 isn't going to be enough. Quite a few of them will start with 5, so just generally speaking, I would recommend if you're going to buy the custom dice, you get 2 decks, also 2 sets. Also, the skill dice 3 isn't really enough. You can go up to 5 ranks in a skill, plus any modifiers you get, add skill dice to your pool. 2 or 3 gear dice is probably enough for most instances, because you can, most of the time when you're rolling for items with a high gear bonus, you're rolling them just on their own, so you could quite happily include them like this. Like for a suit of chainmail, for example, is 6 gear dice, or the armor rating is 6. You could quite easily roll those together for that. Anyway, that's the dice. Let's move those over here, and let's look at the cards now. This is what you get in the card set, the card deck. you get 2 decks of 7 close combat cards, and these are basically used to add a bit of a tactical twist to close combat. I quite like it. There's some mixed feelings online about it, but in general, most people really like it. Initiative cards go from 1 to 10. You could quite easily use a normal deck of cards for these. You have 8 mounts. In fact, I've got some artifacts mixed in here. But yeah, there's 8 mounts, 2 wolves, and the rest are horses with 1 donkey or mule mixed in there. These are named mounts, so they have a little bit of a story about each one, and then their specific stats. None of these are included in any of the books, so the only way to get these named mounts is to get the card deck. Artifacts, there are 22 named artifacts here, and yeah, they're quite good. They have a bit about the legend of that artifact on the back, plus the effect for that artifact. In general, I would say those are quite nice to have as well. So the card deck really is worth getting, I would suggest. Especially for the close combat cards, they really add a lot of tactical depth to a game. But also having these named mounts is nice to have. And actually having a deck to draw from for the artifact cards is also really nice. So I quite like the card deck, would highly recommend them. Also, the dice are made by Q Workshop. They're really high quality. The icons on them are really good. Using a normal set of dice is also possible, but it's going to be a little bit harder to read the results based on how they've laid out the dice with which dice have a 1 symbol on them, a skull symbol. So the skill dice don't, but you can see there's a skull over here on the attribute dice, and there's a skull over here on the gear dice. Okay, so that's the card deck and the dice. There isn't really much more for me to say in this review, so thanks for watching, and if you've got any questions, please leave them in the comments below. And catch you next month for our next visual review. Thanks a lot. Bye.